This is a presentation on sports and domestic violence, specifically football. My name is Alex Gray. I'm an assistant football coach at St. Thomas University, and I have a vested interest in football players on and off the field, which is why this presentation was appealing to me. I will be focusing on the ethics behind the handling of three specific cases of domestic violence in the NFL. The first thing we have to do is take a look at the history of domestic violence in NFL football players. The first person we'll talk about, Ray Rice. He was a Baltimore Ravens running back who was arrested on February 15th, 2014 for simple assault of his girlfriend, at the time now his wife, Janae Rice. Adrian Peterson, running back for the Minnesota Vikings, was arrested 2014 in September and indicted on a felony charge for reckless and negligent injury to a child. Reuben Foster, linebacker for the San Francisco 49ers, was arrested in November 2018 and charged with domestic violence for the second time that year on his then girlfriend. It's important to note that the leading cause of injury to women is domestic violence, and victims aren't necessarily just women. I thought about using another case, which was the Joe Mixon case. However, that case took place in a bar with a woman that was not in a relationship with Joe Mixon, so it didn't qualify, in my opinion, as domestic abuse or domestic violence. The next thing we had to do was kind of define what domestic violence is. Most commonly, domestic violence is a physical harm done to a spouse or child in or around the home of a family. Domestic violence doesn't necessarily involve a violent act against an individual. What separates domestic violence is that it's marked by a relationship between individuals that involves trust. While there may not be physical harm, emotional abuse can be equally detrimental to a victim of domestic violence. Abusers can control victims by limiting their finances, humiliating the victim in public, using fear tactics, or abusing their pets. Victims include men, children, boyfriends, girlfriends, partners. There is no direct definition of domestic violence, but I think that covers all spectrums there. The next thing we have to look at is the NFL's domestic violence policy. The commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, put in place some criteria for people who were found guilty or had extremely overwhelming evidence against them in a case of domestic violence. A first-time offender of domestic violence would get a 6-game suspension without pay from the NFL. A second offense would result in a permanent banishment of that player from the NFL. And a second-time offender who had been banished may petition for a reinstatement after a year, but it wouldn't be guaranteed that they would get back into the NFL. There's only been one person who has served a 6-game suspension, and that was Cowboys running back Ezekiel Elliott, who was charged for the second time with overwhelming evidence of domestic abuse. Now let's take a look at the Ray Rice situation. Rice was seen on video dragging his then-girlfriend Janae's limp body out of an elevator on camera. Owner Steve Biscotti, general manager Ozzie Newsome, and head coach John Harbaugh talked up Rice's character, saying he would be back with the football team after his suspension. He was initially suspended for 2 games from the NFL. Head coach John Harbaugh talked about getting Ray Rice help with his anger and abuse issues. General manager Ozzie Newsome said that he had been lauded as the nicest, hardest working, greatest guy on the team and in the community. Then a second video released from TMZ showed the inside of the elevator and Ray Rice punching his girlfriend in the face. And at that point, the Ravens released Ray Rice for failure to tell the truth. The NFL then gave Ray Rice an indefinite suspension. Looking at the Ray Rice case, I've determined that the NFL's handling of the Ray Rice case was ethical. If he lied about the incident, he should have been given a longer suspension, which he was. The Ravens also acted in an ethical manner in releasing him due to the lies that he told them in the interview process as well. Some of the evidence against him that I believe equated to them ethically handling the case is that Ray Rice married his girlfriend to avoid jail time the way it looked, getting married in between that time because a wife can't testify against her husband. Roger Goodell also said that Ray Rice was ambiguous in his recounting the event when asked by the commissioner, and said that the event that he gave and the testimony that he gave to him was starkly different version of what actually happened on those videos that were released. Looking at the Adrian Peterson situation, we see that Adrian Peterson grabbed a tree branch, which is commonly known as a switch in the South, off of a tree after his son knocked another kid off a bike. He then struck the child repeatedly with the branch. The child reported that Peterson struck him in the face, around the legs, on the side of the stomach, in a number of different places. Peterson was indicted by a grand jury, and he was deactivated by the Vikings and eventually suspended by 1 year from the NFL for domestic violence. It should be known that Peterson's stance in the whole case from the beginning is that he was merely giving his kids the same punishment he had received when he was their age. And part of that, he believes, helped teach him responsibility and manners going into his adult years. Looking at the Adrian Peterson case, I've determined that the Vikings acted in an ethical manner in handling the case with the deactivation of Adrian Peterson at the time of the information coming out. My determination is that the NFL acted unethically in this case. Peterson told the truth and he showed remorse for his actions. There was no difference in his recount of the actions that he did and what happened and what actually happened and came out in court cases. I believe myself that he was using this as a disciplinary measure and not trying to abuse his son. Coming from a family that did use some physical forms of discipline as a child, I too agree that sometimes it may be necessary to spank a child but not abuse a child to the point that they have welts and things of that nature. However, I do believe that him showing remorse and telling the truth did not deserve a year-long suspension. The last situation that we have to look at is the Reuben Foster situation. A young lady accused Reuben Foster of slapping her phone out of her hand, that he pushed her in the chest and slapped her in the face after an altercation between the two, a verbal altercation. Police said that there was a 1-inch scratch over on the woman's left collarbone, which showed some sort of physical nature of the argument or disagreement. The San Francisco 49ers released Reuben Foster after he was arrested. The Washington Redskins signed Foster the following week. Reuben Foster was booked into jail the night before a 49ers game versus the Tampa Bay Bucks in November 2018. The team announced after Foster's first arrest 7 months earlier, and the charges were dropped, that they have a zero tolerance policy. Looking at this case with Reuben Foster, there's a couple of different angles we have to look at. I definitely believe that the 49ers acted ethically in their decision to release Foster. The young lady having the scratch, the evidence, the overwhelming evidence against Reuben Foster tells me that there was some foul play, as well as the fact that this was the second time that he had been charged within that year, and the 49ers setting a zero tolerance policy. They acted ethically because they said what they were going to do, something else happened, and they did it. My determination is also that the Washington Redskins acted unethically in their decision to sign Foster before the NFL and criminal investigation was completed. There are certain things that come above winning football games, and I think that the Washington Redskins have an ethical responsibility to their fan base to put the best product on the team. However, they have an ethical responsibility to communicate to their community to be able to sign players who don't break the law and who treat people with respect. And I do not believe they acted ethically in that decision. All of the evidence in the case points towards some form of domestic violence occurring that night of in November 2018. This was his second time being arrested. I believe the suspension was warranted and will be upheld coming up in the 2019 season. In conclusion, I believe that the NFL wants to act ethically in situations of domestic violence. The problem that they run into is that there is also a court of public opinion and there's also a legal court process that has to be played out, and they don't always mutually coexist. And I believe that causes the commissioner a little bit of heartache in trying to delve out consequences and pass responsibility onto the players for their actions. I do think there's an ethical dilemma that each franchise faces. They have to put the best product on the field. However, they have to act in an ethical manner to do what's right in the community. The NFL has suspension rules for this sort of thing, and I think they need to start to enforce them more within the letter of the law. The players' appeal process has been the biggest hurdle in this suspension process because if somebody's not legally charged or legally found guilty, that gives them a reason to not have to be suspended, and it gives them a leg to stand on. And this is my presentation. I hope everything was clear and concise, and I look forward to seeing my grade. Thank you.